when you can't understand why, or wonder, why can't the narcissist change? Maybe the easiest way to understand that is to ask the same question of yourself. Can you change your personality, or would you want to? How do you stop rumination? Let's break this down. This is a complicated one because it's not going to seem as straightforward as you think. This is a struggle that survivors, this is something that survivors struggle with most. In my healing program, and if you're interested, the link is in the video notes, but in my healing program, amongst the survivors in there, it was the #1 issue raised as a problem in their healing process. And as a therapist, it's not an easy one. So imagine my surprise a few days ago when I saw an article in the New York Times called, "How Do You Stop Rumination?" I dropped what I was doing. I couldn't open and read the article fast enough. And once again, I was frustrated. It's becoming so clear to me that a lot of content on mental health in the mainstream media does not cover the unique corner that survivors of narcissistic abuse live in. The article wasn't all wrong. There were some useful suggestions, some interesting insights that I agreed with. But it also missed the boat. And when they laid out what leads people to ruminate, not one mention was made of being in any kind of toxic relationship, which I got to tell you, in my many years of practice, has been perhaps the most major driver of unbreakable rumination, those toxic relationships. There's a mistake in thinking that rumination is just about being stuck in something that is being exaggerated or distorted in your mind. It's really not that simple. Rumination isn't just about obsessiveness and making a mountain out of a molehill. It's actually about the mountain being real. The things people experience in these relationships, gaslighting, invalidating, confusion, manipulation, it's all real. You aren't exaggerating how bad or how confusing the relationship is. So the rumination is basically a, what the hell is going on here? What can I do about it? And then the second piece of the rumination is the grief about the loss if the relationship ends. So that was my first issue with this article. Then they went on to make 5 suggestions. The first suggestion was, divert your attention. Okay. So since many of you still have to manage the narcissistic person on the daily, or people, where exactly are you supposed to divert your attention to? And even when I've given diversion guidance to my own clients, even I rolled my eyes as I said it. I mean, how many games of Candy Crush how many shows can you binge watch? How much of that can you do to distract from these relationships? How many naps can you take? How many hikes can you take? Whatever. There's one part of the diversion piece I can get behind. Sometimes diverting our attention can refocus our attention, and by doing something else that absorbs us, we may be able to put the ruminating thought down. So I'm not completely mad at the suggestion, but I also have to acknowledge that it's not easy for survivors who, after the diversion, are basically walking right back into the same mess as before, and more rumination will begin. That's an obvious risk of diversion. But heck, if you can find some relief, if your diversion is something like a comedy or getting good feelings from planting some stuff in a garden or something like that, that's a few minutes you're not ruminating, and there might even be relief that overtakes you from a different emotion. Now, the next suggestion was trickier. It was avoid your triggers. Now, that's not easy in a narcissistic relationship because a relationship is just one big trigger. The avoiding things that remind you of the discomfort is hard when the discomfort is living in your house or down the street or in the next office. So it isn't even rumination, but reality. And the constant exposure means you don't get a break. The other suggestion was to block, mute, or unfollow anyone who triggers you. At some point, if you have enough narcissistic people in your life, you may not be following anyone, so you might as well get off social media, which frankly could be a great anti-rumination strategy for narcissistic relationships. I do agree, though, cleaning up your feed can make a difference when it comes to rumination. But avoiding your triggers is a piece of guidance, as a piece of guidance for survivors is rough because it's everywhere. And then, honestly, you could overcorrect so much that you almost end up experiencing like an agoraphobic reaction if I can't leave my house because the world is nothing but triggers, unless the triggers are in your house. Now listen, in this article, all of the guidance wasn't bad, and there are some takeaways that could be useful for survivors of narcissistic abuse who are struggling with rumination. One was immersion in a moment. I suggest to survivors when they are in a narcissistic relationship moment that they immerse themselves in their surroundings and sort of try to tune the narcissist out. One way I think that can be done is through description. Describe the scene around you in minute detail. The color of the floor, the smell in the air, the color of the walls, the material the door is made of, the sounds, whatever. It can kind of pull you out of the narcissistic person's madness and ground you in your own reality. The article was really talking about immersing in moments so you are present and break out of the thought loop. Again, not easy, but those mindful moments may break the cycle. But then you have to deal with the narcissistic person and the confusing memories, and rumination then is likely to kick back in. It's just the nature of narcissistic relationships. Another thing they suggested is a worry timer. Give yourself 30 minutes and you can worry all you want, but then you have to stop. Again, that's not easy. My guidance is a riff on that, which is go ruminate away. Talk about it, journal about it. Now, it can sometimes be hard to find people to ruminate repeatedly with, but if you got people you can turn to, do it, and that might also be therapy, support groups. There are some stories some of my clients have repeated about 100 times to me, and I don't stop them and say, haven't I heard that before? I listen carefully to see if anything is shifting for them. I validate and empathize and recognize that each time they share it, maybe they are slowly releasing it and breaking out of that cycle of rumination. Sometimes we just have to keep playing it out over and over to finally let it go. Reading the article, though, reminded me why so many survivors are hamstrung by rumination and find it so difficult to recover from it. So much of the guidance about rumination doesn't account for the unique confusion raised by a narcissistic relationship, a confusion that is often unacknowledged by others and made worse if you have to keep facing these folks down. So a personal example I could share is that I recently had to deal with a situation like this in my own life. I took my guidance and was fortunate enough to have a few sounding boards. And I just kept talking about it. In a way, talking about this narcissistic situation I was in, and it's not a pleasant metaphor, it was like throwing up. Like it got the icky feeling out of my gut. The situation ultimately has worked its way out. I'm still in situations that bring up the feelings, but I can talk it out, and talking it out can break the rumination cycle. The situation brings up old feelings and anger, and all the distraction in the world won't take the rumination away when it comes back again. But most people don't get that opportunity to talk it out. If you can, find your people who give you permission to talk about it and hopefully let it go. Other people not understanding narcissistic abuse, if you don't have those people in your life, it can make this harder. But if you can't avoid your triggers or distract this away, you can slowly work it through and recognize that the rumination about narcissistic abuse is a rumination like no other. And just knowing that can help you feel a little less obsessive. And above all else, recognize that just because a news article doesn't get it or recognize the unique form of rumination you're facing doesn't mean that it's not happening. I don't want to be a hater because the article did actually hit some important points and points of view, but leaving out people who are going through toxic relationships and not recognizing that they're one of the groups that are the most impacted by rumination misses a unique experience of rumination and the most problematic pattern that survivors of narcissistic abuse struggle with. So lots of people are talking about low contact online. What I want to do in this video is, because so many people are talking about it here on a channel about narcissism, I want to talk about the pros and cons. It's not a bad strategy at all, but it's not an answer, a complete 100% foolproof answer in every narcissistically abusive situation. So first, let's get our terms straight. Let's start with talking about no contact. No contact is just what it sounds like. It's scorched earth. You don't take the calls, you block them, you don't show up. It's like you are dead to the person and they are dead to you. Done. Now, no contact to me, though, is a pretty rarefied strategy. Not everyone has access to being able to do no contact. It wouldn't work, for example, if you're co parenting minor children. It doesn't really work in all workplaces. It doesn't always work in family systems if you want access to some family members and want to go no contact with others or have children who are invested in cousins or grandparents. Now, when you're able to do no contact, frankly, it works like a charm. You cut out the exposure to the toxic person or situation, and obviously, the vast majority of people feel better. Some people go no contact and really hold to it, but then life happens, an illness, a death, and then they're pulled back in. And they will liken being pulled back into drinking poison, getting pulled back into a system that they bravely went no contact from. And as soon as they're back into it, they literally feel sick right away. Now, there are also techniques like gray rocking. That's that dull, emotionless, inert sort of responding to a narcissistic person in hopes that maybe they'll get bored because you aren't taking the bait. You're not even showing them any emotion. They get bored and move on. Then there's firewalling, a technique where you are very careful to not let any sensitive information out. You kind of just stick to talking about the weather. You also learn to not personalize what they do and say, so you don't take in their nonsense and make it your own. It means keeping your distance and really disengaging and interacting as little as possible. But when you interact, you don't have to be as flat as gray rock. You can sort of have normal emotional range. You just can't share anything about yourself. It's kind of saying, hey, looks like it's going to rain tomorrow. Then there's yellow rocking, where you still keep it tight. You don't take the bait, but you do allow yourself emotional range. This is often recommended to co-parents in these kinds of situations. And then that way your children aren't thrown off by sort of the flatness of gray rocking, which can be sort of unsettling for a child who's trying to negotiate this territory. But all of this gray rocking, firewalling, and yellow rocking, all of it fall under the rubric of low contact. Low contact is realistic. It may mean, for example, you show up for one family dinner a year or only see the ex at the children's soccer games. But low contact also means that you really do practice the deep technique. You don't engage, nor do you defend or explain or personalize. Like I said, you stick to the weather, neutral topics like, oh, look, they opened a new coffee shop in town. There is just no there when you talk under low contact situations. Low contact means that you get out before the emotions start to flare. And when you sense the baiting starting and coming out, you gracefully find the exits. Low contact is not as easy peasy as it sounds. There are often enabler pressures floating around you. Oh, come on now. Your brother isn't that bad. And your mom made lasagna. Come on over for dinner. Or your cousin's visiting from another country. You have to come. Or family members pressuring you to do more things with the ex so the children have a sense of family. Or a group of friends saying, oh, come on now. She isn't that bad. Come on our wine tasting weekend. It'll be okay. Or a group of colleagues sort of cajoling you to go to the workplace happy hour. Low contact means holding your ground even when those pressures show up. It means not taking the bait during your encounters. It means not getting lulled into a hoovery space. Low contact is often an interesting form of diplomacy that allows family systems to keep running at some level, workplaces to keep working, children maybe feeling a little bit more comfortable in sort of divorce situations, friend groups may be functional. It's not meant to be enabling, nor is it meant to be denial. You are aware of what you're doing and protective of yourself, but not fully cutting away because you feel like you can't do that. Now you have to pace your low contact. It doesn't mean the same amount of contact for everyone. One person's low contact is one person's high contact. For some people, it might mean contact once a week. For others, it may mean once a year. It really depends on the nature of the relationship and the context of that relationship. But low contact is an intentional process. It means you do it in settings and contacts that are comfortable to you, where escape is readily available at times when you feel you have the bandwidth to manage it, or when you feel supported. For example, I've seen several parents of adult children where there is one parent who is a narcissist having to do this at weddings or christenings, things for their adult children. At that point, their children are adults. You're no longer juggling all the D and all this other stuff and all those other logistics. So there's really no more reason for any contact with that narcissistic ex. But then a wedding or that kind of intense social event brings you together with your ex. And low contact might mean, for example, at that wedding, having lots of support around you as a co-parent in this situation, and having the people around you who know that they can run and should run interference, so you can minimize your contact with the other parent and allow your child to have a wonderful wedding day, and for you to be fully present without having to dodge getting cornered or gaslighted by the narcissistic ex. That's an example of how that intentionality of low contact works. Low contact is a form of something that I've long called soul distancing. Your mind and body can be in the interaction, but you keep your soul out of it. You can have the superficial conversations about the wedding and maintain a boundary. You can get out when you start feeling, when you can get out of the interaction, step away. When you start feeling more and more uncomfortable, you can be like, oh, sorry, got to go to the bathroom. So low contact is an umbrella term that takes in a lot of territory, but it's a realistic approach to the many narcissistic relationships that we have in our lives and that we don't have the luxury of fully cutting and running from. So anyone who's listened this far, I'd love to hear from you. Have any of you tried low contact? Has it worked? What has worked and what hasn't worked? Because some people have said, like, I've done low contact, but some things worked better than others. People might find themselves getting sucked into texting too much or any of those things. So let us know what your low contact strategies are and what has worked. And like I said, in some ways it's all relative. One person's low contact is one person's way too much. So be aware that there's something relative about it. But for you, it's definitely going to mark a departure from regular contact. And if it's somebody, for example, you have to, I don't know, see with some regularity, for example, at work, it's a great example is you don't go to the happy hour, you really keep to yourself. So give it a shot, but I think it is a very useful technique in narcissistic relationships. One of the hardest things about, I think, being a person, but definitely in narcissistic relationships is really hard, is that multiple things can be true at the same time. And this is something that can make healing, it can make navigating these waters, it can make even being in therapy about these really tricky. So let's talk about that. A narcissistic relationship is a place where, I think this is true of any relationship, but it's really more difficult here. But it's a place where multiple truths can simultaneously coexist. So let's try it like this. I have a partner. My partner is attractive and successful. My partner is charismatic and charming. My partner is manipulative and controlling. My partner is cheating on me. I love being married, and I love being part of a family. All of those things can simultaneously be true. And that really, really is difficult. So what do you do with that? Because that's the fact. They're all true at the same time. In life, multiple truths come up all the time. It's actually what makes being a person so hard. I want to go out with my friends tonight. The restaurant they are going to is expensive. I can't afford the cost of that restaurant. So in this example, it's a silly example, but all of those things are also true. And that means that making a decision becomes uncomfortable. And it might even make us uncomfortable about our life circumstance. It can make us angry. We either have to put ourselves in a precarious situation, maybe borrowing money or taking on debt, or an uncomfortable situation, I may have to borrow or let them know I can't afford it, or a situation that feels sad or leaves us feeling let down. I'm going to have to miss this night out. I can't afford to go. Obviously, all of this idea of multiple truths, very much relates to cognitive dissonance, because these multiple truths, especially when they don't line up, it's uncomfortable all around. So to break the tension, we may tell ourselves something that makes it more bearable. You might say something like, I've heard that restaurant's not very good and it's probably not going to be that fun. I've heard that it's overpriced for what you get, and I'm definitely going to have more fun at home. Now, what I'm giving you here is a low stakes example just to make a point. Going back to the original example with the successful, charming, manipulative, unfaithful partner for the person who likes being married, tension ensues, and cognitive dissonance would have that person most likely saying something like, all marriages are hard, or maybe I expect too much. But the concept of multiple truths goes above and beyond just cognitive dissonance, though it's a big part of it. The multiple truths of it all is why these relationships are so difficult. The narcissistic person may be your partner, your parent, your friend, or your sibling. There's a history. People may like them. They may sometimes or often treat you badly. It doesn't line up, and your truths may be very different than another person's truths about the same narcissistic person. People don't love talking about narcissistic relationships unless they are in one or have been in one themselves. I'll tell you that right now. This is not a conversation people want to have unless they've been there. Many other people view the framework of reflecting on narcissism or opining that a person's behavioral patterns are narcissistic as judgy or dismissive or just mean. The multiple truths of it all can actually help you understand why this is all such a mess for you, because it also allows you to balance what may be a difficult history for the narcissistic person themselves. I'll give you an example. My parent has been invalidating me since I was a child. The community I grew up in thinks my parent is a solid person and a pillar of the community. Other family members think that my parent is generous. My parent had a knack for waiting until the family was behind closed doors before yelling and flying into an abusive rage. My parent grew up with an alcoholic and abusive father. My parents' own parents divorced when my parent was a small child, and that intensified the abuse. My parent is successful and was a good financial provider. For lots of people out there, laying out the multiple truths is something you often don't do in a narcissistic relationship, at least not in black and white right there on paper in front of you. The key is to remember that multiple things can be true at the same time. In our zeal or need to make it all good or all bad, it can lead us to missing how complex all of this is, because it can be all of these things all at once. When you are able to be and recognize the multiple truths, it actually, strange as it may sound, ultimately can be easier to think about it, talk about it, and understand why you are so confused without blaming yourself. In our social media, quick bites of information world that we live in, we want things to be simple. That things are simple, straightforward, can be boiled down to good or bad, happy or sad, healthy or unhealthy. It's what we want. But human relationships and human experience don't work that way. Definitely not narcissistic relationships. I know that many people grapple with this idea of just writing a significant relationship, writing it off, a significant relationship in their lives as it being narcissistic or toxic, instead of getting caught up and that idea, instead of getting caught up in the idea of like, oh, I'm going to get rid of it, it's toxic. It may be much more useful to think about it through the lens of multiple truths, not justify it, but see how complicated it is. I also know that many feel that by just making it about narcissism, that they may not be showing sufficient compassion to a person who's important in their lives, but also may have this kind of personality, and who may have also had a difficult road themselves. Multiple truths, using that as a model, allows you to acknowledge the difficult road that person has and simultaneously recognizing that the behavior they're showing to you now is unacceptable. Holding all of these things at the same time can actually be an avenue to allow you to retain compassion in your heart, but also critically assess the fact that you're being treated really badly. I'm not saying any of this is comfortable, but it gives you a more nuanced frame. And again, I'm also not saying it's going to make decision making or boundaries or any of it easier. But just by being aware that lots of things that don't line up can all be true at the same time, can actually foster self-compassion, self-kindness, and allow you to recognize, no matter how you proceed, that this wasn't as simple as, whoa, this is a narcissistic relationship, I gotta go. But instead, that this is never going to be easy, and I can give myself permission to figure out what works best for me. Whether about narcissistic folks or ourselves, multiple things are true about us. But again, I think one of the big struggles in this space is wanting to make it black or white. Working through these relationships is anything but by seeing it that way and recognizing, yeah, their tough backstory is true, and the way they're treating me is also unacceptable, it can give you a minute and say, all right, I still need to figure out what's happening now, but I don't have to do something that in my heart, just writing someone off, that feels like it's not compassionate. So many of you say, why can't they change? So let me ask you this. You can't change your personality that much. How do you think they will? Let's say, as an example, let's say you're an extroverted and agreeable person. That's your personality. So could you switch it up and be more antagonistic, introverted and narcissistic tomorrow, or in a week, or in a year? Yeah, that's what I thought. Probably not. Had a great Q&A recently with great questions from my healing community. You ought to come join us if you're interested in a deeper dive on healing. That link is in the video notes, and we have these monthly Q&As. But once again in that Q&A, the age-old question of why don't they change come up? Or rather, can they change? Narcissistic personalities are more rigid than ours because it's a little bit maladaptive. You got that. But let's turn the question around, because it can really help you in your sort of progression towards radical acceptance. If you look at work by folks like Sandra Brown and her colleagues, she suggests that the personality style that is at greater risk of getting sucked into narcissistic or psychopathic relationships is the agreeable style. And that makes sense. Agreeable personalities are modest, empathic, humble, trusting, they follow the rules, they give of themselves to others, have lots of equanimity, they're easy to get along with, they compromise. It's as close to an empath personality style as we have in our personality models, like the Big Five model. And we know that narcissists target empaths, mostly because they know they can get away with a lot of stuff with them. So to all of you out there who are agreeable, let me ask you this. How easily would you be able to start becoming unempathic, manipulative, entitled, arrogant, attention-seeking, and hostile? Now, I know that may sound odd, especially on this channel, because those aren't good things to many of us. But we also know those qualities result in people being more likely to make more money or become leaders. Right? If you were to try to be that person, so let's say you tried to be that antagonistic person, roll into the grocery store tomorrow and start yelling at the clerk for not moving faster, or walk around and tell everyone how great you are, or monopolize conversations, or interrupt people, or put hostile comments on people's social media feeds, or take advantage of people, or only care about superficial qualities, or you gaslight your friends. How easy would that be for you to start doing that? How would it feel? Let me try it this way. Maybe all of you aren't watching this aren't agreeable. Maybe some of you are introverted. So let's try that. Introversion is a personality style. Can you change that? Some of you introverts out there are thinking, yeah, I could step out of my comfort zone, go to a few more parties or networking events, talk to a few more strangers. Yeah, I believe you. Yes, you could. And how would you feel afterwards? I'm guessing tired, depleted, Given a choice, would you become a social butterfly and go out 3 or 4 nights a week? Probably not, but you could probably rally from time to time. So, if you can't change your agreeable personality to an antagonistic or narcissistic one, if you can't change your introverted personality to an extroverted one, I really want you to stop and think about the reality or likelihood of the narcissistic person in your life making a change and becoming agreeable and empathic and self-reflective. I know, I can hear you all the way here. Some of you are thinking, well, Dr. Ramani, don't be like that. Being agreeable is good. It's healthy. So agreeable people shouldn't have to want to change. They wouldn't or shouldn't, right? Okay. But we also know, and the research shows us this, agreeable people don't make as much money. And folks like having enough money, right? I agree that from a psychological perspective, agreeable is good for us. I love me agreeable people, right? It is a pro-social trait. It is associated with greater relationship health. It is good for our mental health. It's good for our physical health. It means you cultivate more social support. But it also makes you a greater target for a narcissistic person. And in the long run, being agreeable may also be risky because all of those sweet, agreeable people out there, you also tend to blame yourselves for what happens in a narcissistic relationship rather than recognizing that this one's on the narcissist. So you may be thinking, well, is this all subjective or even a value judgment? Does narcissism have its good qualities as well? I don't see it that way. I don't see how being unkind, dismissive, manipulative, or unempathic to other people is ever good for anyone. But given the incivility in the world today, I'm guessing that there's a lot of people out there who disagree with me. The fact is, narcissistic people are really efficient because they don't care about other people and they don't waste time on doing things or helping people or doing anything that doesn't forward their cause, even if other people need their help. They're really good at being negotiators because they can be bullies. They're very manipulative. That also helps when you're doing negotiating as well. Narcissistic people are willing to do what it takes to succeed, even if that means taking advantage of or manipulating other people. And as you can imagine, they succeed. They make lots of money and they kind of run the world. Lots of people would say, well, those seem like good things if you could do all that and run the world. In fact, one could argue that the qualities that comprise narcissism are a veritable modern-day guide to business and professional success. So maybe narcissistic people have as little incentive to change as the agreeable people do. In fact, it is us unfortunate introverts who may be the most incentivized to change because kind of across the board in the research, extroverts fare better. But as a dyed-in-the-wool introvert here, I am good. Me, cat, TV, taken, I'm golden. And if I never again go to another party, I'm fine. It's just easier for me and less exhausting. But I know I can't get away with that in my life. But I also know once a month is about all the heavy social interaction I can handle. And maybe that's that. When you can't understand why, or wonder, why can't the narcissist change? Maybe the easiest way to understand that is to ask the same question of yourself. Can you change your personality or would you want to? Narcissistic personality is more rigid, so change is much harder. And it's hard enough for the rest of us. I put it this way because lots of people out there assume they can and will change. At least the introverts can show up to the party. You know why they often show up? Because they have empathy and they know it would matter to their friends. But the narcissistic people don't have the empathy as an incentive. The money and the success, though, may be an incentive again for them to not change. Thinking about it this way is a major driver to foster radical acceptance. If you can see it this way, it may be easier for you to radically accept, not from a place of sad resignation, oh, I guess they're not going to change, but, oh, I get it. I can't stop being agreeable. They can't stop being narcissistic. I hope you all get this. And to all of those agreeable introverts out there, I do love you. Do not change a thing. But really think on this, right? Our personalities, They'd be hard for us to change them too. The healthier the personality, the more movement there is for change, right? The healthier we are, we can say like, okay, I need to get out a little bit more. My friends want to see me. But that introvert will come home and say, oh my, am I exhausted, right? They'll push themselves out of empathy, but that doesn't mean they're going to start going out multiple nights of the week. The hardest part for people who are in narcissistically abusive relationships is them thinking, why can't they change the part that is so mean to me and other people? Because it's part of their personality, right? And then you're thinking, well, if that's the case, then am I being mean by leaving? Well, you can stay, but you're going to continue being treated badly. Or you can have radical acceptance and say, if I do stay, I got to understand that this is how it is. But if you can see your personality and their personality in a similar way, you're going to start seeing how unlikely it is for them to change. Because just as you're not going to go out into the street and start screaming some entitled rant, they're not about to start being sort of super empathic and saying, hey, let's just talk about our feelings and be vulnerable. And yeah, if that's your experience, I completely believe that. That's not going to happen. So it's painful to think that they won't make that change for you. And the problem is for so many survivors, they're thinking, well, maybe it's me, and maybe I have the ability to change their personality. Could a narcissistic person make you less agreeable? No. So why would you be able to do that for them? Hope that helps. Thanks again.